All right, students, let's try graphing a more complicated one now. So I see my a value is -2. So if a is -2, I know my amplitude is 2 and I'm reflecting over the x-axis. My b value, well, actually this isn't in the right form for me to pick out the b value. I can say that it's 2, but it's going to affect my c value. So really, first I need to look at the factored form of this. So this is an equivalent equation to -2 cosine of 2x plus pi over 2. So if I expand this, I would end up with this, plus 1. So my b value is 2. This tells me my period is 2 pi over 2, which is the same as pi. My c value is -pi over 2, so I'm moving to the left, pi over 2. Remember, always the opposite of what we see. My d value is +1, so my graph has been shifted up 1. My amplitude tells me where my max is and where my min is going to be. So again, my amplitude is 2. My negative is reflecting. I'm going to start at -pi over 2. So I'm going to go over 2 just because I like to go over 2. I'm going to call that -pi over 2. And that's where I'm going to put my minimum value. And I'm putting my minimum value because cosine normally starts at its maximum, but my negative is reflecting. Okay, now I'm going to use my period to figure out where I'm going to finish a full cycle. So -pi over 2 plus pi equals pi over 2. So that must be where I'll finish a full cycle. So since I said 2 spaces was -pi over 2, 2 is +pi over 2, and that's where I'm going to finish a cycle. Halfway between those must be where I'm at the opposite side. So this one is more squished than normal, but that's okay. And now I'll come down to my minimum, back to the center, up to my maximum. So pi over 2, this must be pi, and then this must be 2 pi. So let's see if we're on the right track. So at x equals 2 pi, my y value must be, I'm going to plug into this original, -2 cosine. 2 times 2 pi is 4 pi, plus pi is 5 pi, plus 1. Cosine of 5 pi, well, if we think back, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi is here. Cosine is -1. So -2 times -1 plus 1 is 3, and that fits with my graph. So I feel good about my points. I'll keep going and try to draw as smooth of a curve as I can. Did not go so well on the left side there, but better over here. Make sure you label your axes clearly. So we're counting by ones. So my max is 3, my min is -1, and I can see that every 2 spaces is pi over 2. All right, let's try this next one. So I've got an a value of 2. If I factor out my 3, I've got x plus pi over 6 minus 2. So b value is 3. That tells me period is going to be 2 pi over 3. My c value, -pi over 6. So we've gone left, pi over 6. Remember, opposite of what we see. My d value is -2. So I've got a big graph here. So -2, amplitude is 2. So we're not filling up any of this space. That's a shame. Down 2. So I can label this as y equals -4, y equals -2. And of course, we've got the x-axis. So I'm going to move left pi over 6. So that means I'm going to start at -pi over 6 with my sign. So I'll label this as -pi over 6. My period is going to complete when I go a distance of 2 pi over 3. So -pi over 6 plus 2 pi over 3 is going to give me 5 pi over 6. So maybe counting 2 spaces for pi over 6 is too much. So I'm going to make that just 1. So let's call this one negative pi over 6. So then 5 pi over 6 will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pi over 6 here. So is that right? Ooh, sorry. This is 4 pi over 6 minus pi over 6 is 3 pi over 6. So 3 pi over 6, of course, is the same as pi over 2. Okay, so I can still keep going with this. Pi over 6, 1, 2, 3 pi over 6, so that's pi over 2. Sine is going to start at its center. It's a normal sine graph. I'm going to finish a cycle here. So in the middle, I'm back to the middle because it's sine, and then halfway between I'll go up and then down. So 3 spaces was pi over 2, 3 spaces is going to be pi. I'm just going to keep going, up, middle, down, back to the middle. And so let's go ahead and test this. Let's test at pi. Or we've got pi over 2's, so I could test at pi over 2, but let's go ahead and test with pi. We can do it. So at x equals pi, y is equal to 2 sine 3 pi plus pi over 2. So I'm going to go ahead and call that 6 pi over, so that was 3 pi, so I'm calling it 6 pi over 2 plus pi over 2 minus 2. So sine of 7 pi over 2, well, pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4, 5, 6. Here's 7 pi over 2. Sine is negative down here. So I'm going to have negative, so 2 times negative 1 minus 2 is equal to negative 4. And I had my minimum at pi, so that makes sense. So I can keep going with my graph to get a few more points to make a nice smooth curve. And here is my graph. Notice that in this case, my graph looks like a cosine curve as well. And that's what we're going to get into next.